My name is Artemis Baltoyanni, and we're currently at my exhibition space, The Intermission, located in Piraeus. And we have here Zoe Paul, the artist that is currently exhibiting here. Zoe Paul. The model of The Intermission is that we do not represent artists, but we focus on solo shows with artists together with the representing gallery. So there are, though, cases that the artist has no representing gallery, which is the case at the moment, and seems to be also the case in the right after exhibition, anyway. So the collaboration with Zoe, let's say, I know Zoe's work for quite some years. I've been a fan of Zoe's work. I've followed her work as an artist, and I know her also personally, which sometimes has a negative effect, but in this case it had a positive effect. And we came up with the idea, or I came up with the idea, that there was an opportunity for us to work in a different way, other than me placing the work or me collecting the work. Zoe lives currently and works in Athens, and has never exhibited in Piraeus. And it was, I think you were also, you were familiar with the space. You had seen another show, and it seemed to me like after our first conversation that even architecturally, let's speak, the space was of interest to you to do a show here.
Yeah, I mean, for sure architecturally, but also I have, even though I've shown a lot, I've been based in Greece, I've been living in Greece for the last 7 years, but I haven't, and have been showing a lot outside of Greece, but actually haven't shown in Greece for the last 3 or 4 years. Oh. So it was really nice to be asked to make a show in Athens, but also maybe not in Athens, in Piraeus, which I think is a really exciting area. And also because of my connection to Kythera, where I grew up, it's actually within the municipality of Piraeus. Yeah. So there's this extra connection. And immediately when Artemis asked me to make the show, the first thing I saw was the height of the ceiling and the fact that the environment, it's like, I mean, it's been renovated so much that it is a, let's say, a white cube gallery in some sense, but you've left like remnants of the original structure, which I really liked, because it's both a neutral space, but also it has this feeling of what this building was, maybe what was happening in the street, how this road, let's say, or area was developed.
We haven't completely covered its history.
Exactly, but it's still like, it's a space that you can then place things on. And I also had this feeling that because of the way that the gallery is made with this indent and lower section, it became like a cave. When you asked me to make the show, I had this bead curtain of a Ζαργάνα I had made it for a previous show, but it was in my studio, and also because I work a lot with the students from the School of Fine Art, that I think it's also nice to be able to show in Greece so that they work on something and then they can see it as well, because if I'm showing outside all the time, it's difficult for people to understand that my base is here. So especially in relation to this being Piraeus, and I had the Ζαργάνα bead curtain. It's the first curtain that I've made which is non-figurative. Well, it's still figurative because it's a fish, and also because the meaning that goes behind it.
Because it refers to a human.
Because it refers to a human.
But generally speaking on this show, either the curtains that I had seen in the past, or all work that is painted, the tiles that you did, or drawings that you did, were all focused on very characteristic figures, which they're quite robust. There is a suggestion of gender, but they're essentially genderless. The robustness reminds me of Picasso, and they're usually rendered in rather simple lines in a kind of more of a primitive, and that's where Picasso kind of meets primitive in any case. So this is, and I don't know if this is the first show, but the show, which is mostly focused on fish here and sea creatures, seems to be a departure. I mean, not a departure, but a different kind of thematology explored.
It's completely a departure, and I think it's, for me it feels like a more grown-up show, actually. Like, perhaps, I'm not saying that I think that these works are developed from those figures, which, so I draw figures in order to like map the architecture of space, and I also draw fish in order to learn to see
I want to hear more about the drawing figures to map the architecture of space. You're defining space in relation to the figures.
Yeah, I think of every object that we encounter that's around us as related to our physicality.
Yeah.
And I was doing these huge murals on the walls of figures, and that's really about, let's say, humanizing or domesticating and adjusting the space, because, I mean, obviously when I do group shows, that's a different story, but when I'm making an entire exhibition, I see the whole thing as being an installation. It's very important the way the works are placed next to each other and the relation they have with each other. So doing works that are also on the wall, like enclosing the space, using the space, and the architecture of the space becomes really important. In this case, the space has its own feeling, and the first thing I thought, okay, after the fish, it needed to have something at the back, and I'd been wanting to make this mural for years since I started making these paintings. Years ago when I was at college, I made these sculptures out of tiles. So it's been this ongoing thing, but it's an obvious progression from the wall paintings, which are made of this raw clay, which gets washed off. And that also I like because it is ephemeral, it's a one-time thing. But, you know, I was also falling in love with some of these drawings, and then to have to wash them away was
painful.
It was a bit painful, and I thought, okay, well, if I can wash them away, why don't I also develop that and start making them into works which can be more permanent? And I guess like glaze on ceramic is one of the most permanent mediums that you can get. I mean, we have like, it's the only thing that doesn't change. You're essentially creating like a solid rock, an alchemical bond of minerals onto mineral. We look at clay or ceramics that have been glazed thousands of years ago, and the colors that we're seeing now will be exactly the same colors that they were seeing then. And there's something magical about that we have this element of time that goes through.
Especially because we often see the bringing together of the old and the new is a big part of your work. This kind of bringing together traditions of making things, also ideas or forms, and then combining again with considering the effect of technology, the impact that it has on community, or the effect of technology in making things. So I think this is something that goes through your work. And actually, it's only now that we're talking about the building, I was also thinking that this is then a very relevant building to your work.
Yeah.
This kind of, there's no time in a way for you.
I mean, even like, let's go back to this Piraeus and the title and the Ζαργάνα work, because this title is really important. In a sense, this exhibition, Η Ζαργάνα, could only happen with the weight that it carries in Piraeus. It couldn't even happen in Athens because the title is so connected to this history of Rembetika that came from Piraeus, and the mangas. The mangas also is like kind of the opposite. What did you say? Like the opposite of the Ζαργάνα. But
how would we explain the mangas to the international audience?
Mangas. Like a kind of macho, very masculine.
Yeah, it's a dude, it's a street smart kind of male figure, very prominent in the city of Piraeus at the time.
At the time, which was like the 50s, I guess, 40s, 50s, and that was like during the post-Civil War, post-migration of peoples from Asia Minor into Greece. So it was like a lot of those communities that had rebased themselves in Piraeus. Near Smyrni, which is Kamini.
This is probably the most diverse area compared to Athens, let's say, because it is a port, so it's receiving all of these immigrants and Greek immigrants in a way, also from the islands.
From the islands, but also like foreigners passing through, because it's this big port, so sailors coming through, and with the sailors come, I guess we can refer to like Never on a Sunday. But
the house is very close to here, where it was.
Really?
Yes, we can go after.
And I mean, she's like the personification. I think if we try and explain what Η Ζαργάνα is, it would be Melini Mercouri and Η Ζαργάνα in Never on a Sunday. She's this character, but I think it's also a character, like we can say it's from the 50s, but it's definitely a character that still exists within society, as is Mangas.
Yeah.
But I think the language is slightly dated in that it's relating to that time period. But the culture is still very much present. And
I think it is important to define or to explain that we haven't even explained that. Let's start with that. Η Ζαργάνα μου means my needlefish, the exact translation.
No, because like a Ζαργάνα, the fish is a needlefish. But
yeah.
Η Ζαργάνα μου, yes, I guess you could say it's my needlefish, but it's...
I mean, the actual word-by-word translation, it refers to an affectionate way of calling a woman.
But I think if you say Η Ζαργάνα μου, in Greek, people will understand it more as a woman than a fish.
They will only understand it as a woman and not as a, I mean,
so it's a term
except if you speak to a fisherman maybe, but
phrase.
It's a very known phrase, but I think when we're describing that there is maybe a flirtatious reference, I think it is important to explain that it is not in any way derogatory.
It's also something that during the opening when I'm like speaking to people or giving tours or something, the amount of women that are like, I'm Ζαργάνα, you know, it's something that you bring on yourself and it's actually something to be proud of, and I think it speaks a lot about the feminism that exists in, let's say, Greece and the Middle East, because they're quite similar culturally compared to, let's say, the West or the Northern West, which perhaps that would be seen as an insult. And I feel like I'm almost treading a fine line, but I think it's important to be able to talk about those types, to be able to talk about sexuality within gender, and the strength of, I think the strength of the term Η Ζαργάνα μου, which implies also a very strong woman who is strong by her own femininity. She uses her femininity to be, for her own strength, to be empowered. I can't speak about mangas because
no, it's okay. Let's
I identify as a woman. I know it's like radical.
So when you made the curtain that was obviously that was not made initially for this show, and you were actually, I've heard you say that you do not have a clear idea of the image before. It is the amount of colored of beads that also directs the choice of image, or the form, let's say, of the image.
Yeah, so I mean, all the beads are made by, I hand roll each little bead from, in this case, it was all white clay, and I had a chrome oxide, and then I sprayed them with chrome oxide. So they have this very slight green tint, some more than others, but it's very subtle. Like you can kind of see from sitting down here, there's this green sheen that goes over the back and the belly of the fish. But then I fire them in a like primitive type of oven, which I made from a metal rubbish bin with sawdust
you made it on your
inside.
own?
It's just a metal rubbish bin with holes in the bottom so that the air can come
the
through.
Oven.
The oven. And then it's sawdust inside, and now I put the ceramic fiber blanket around it, which raises the temperature up. So, I mean, it's ceramic, like you can't break them. I wouldn't want to put them outside because they are, I mean, the work in itself is very fragile, but they're ceramic. But then, depending on the positioning of the beads in the oven, like the ones at the bottom go very dark because there's more oxygen coming in. And then the beads that are on the top pile are white because there's reduction, there's less oxygen. So then, I sort them, and from that I start making the image. But I also work from a lot of drawings. I do a lot of these drawings, and again, like going back between drawing figures and drawing fish. Like the fish is something. The figure, I kind of do it with an outline, and it's normally one line, and it's to do with this like following a line round a space of architecture. Whereas painting fish, it's more about the form of the fish, and so I have these two. One is architectural, one is more formal. Like I don't know. There's something with fish that's very interesting. Because they're slimy, they move, they flop around, and they're also kind of unnatural. Like they come from another world to us. They come from. There's something a bit dark about it as well. So then I have all these drawings of fish, sketches that I've done, and I work directly from those. So there's no one image that this is taken from. Let's say it's like a combination, and then I make it on the floor. It's like a large mosaic on the floor, and I have this very tall ladder that I stand on and photograph, and I'm constantly working, like photographing it, looking back, checking. It'll be like, just changing one or two beads will change the whole feeling of the mosaic. And then once the work is perfect, as I can see it, then we start threading. And then it's only at the very last minute that the whole thing gets hung up. And it's always really exciting to see a curtain hanging for the first time because, I've never seen it hanging before. I've only ever seen it horizontal. So seeing it lifted, it's completely different. and especially one of this scale, which is obviously so high.
There is a mosaic in the sense that it is an image that is made out of like small parts that consist the whole. And also it's a specific way of making an image that is a process of arrangement.
Mm-hmm.
I would speak of the uncontrolled element or of the natural element in the process, which I guess to a certain extent is true of any creation. But in particularly, I feel a bit more pronounced in your work, and this is exactly what we're discussing about the process of the beads. You don't actually know how many beads how many dark beads you're gonna get, how many light beads you're gonna get, and equivalently, the decision to make, to paint the tiles, like to use the tiles, to color the tiles using oxides. Again, there is a process of you're firing it and you're waiting for a surprise.
I mean, I think that's the thing with clay in general. The thing that interests me, number one, with clay is that it has this plasticity to it, but it also has kind of cultural and anthropological heritage. Yeah. Like it's been part of our human lives for so long. We've used it for like roof tiles, drinking cups, floors, buildings. And it's also this kind of symbiosis with nature. It's made up of little dead animals. So that in itself, it feels like that also like conveys that energy, you know, like it has the energy of the animal life that came before it. There's a kind of spirit in it, and especially working with the pots. Let's put an irrigation system on the ceiling. And it again like made this whole like cave situation, but I make them all together, and I start with like a big lump of clay and then just gradually start building the clay out. And that again is like leaving the clay to do its thing, and the shapes that emerge, they are kind of anthropomorphic in all of their shapes. And like sometimes I put a little bit of my own feeling into that, but other times it's more just, I mean mostly it's more as I'm building the clay up, it starts to like collapse on its own weight, and the shape is created by the clay like giving something back. But especially because they're like made of this scale, almost like torso scale. You start with a lump of clay and then build up like with a big fat tube. And then I use a wooden spoon, which is, because I'm using a lot of these like, let's say, non-technological materials, I started Googling different ways of firing. And my uncle in South Africa has these huge, big ceramic bowls, which are like this type of Zulu ceramics. And so I started Googling these, and actually they're made by using a wooden spoon to like compress the clay. And I thought that's like so beautiful, because you're not creating, you're more like, then you start using the air inside the shape to sculpt. Whereas we always think about using the clay like to create, we're not thinking about the air inside necessarily, but I think as a sculptor, or even a painter, maybe you're looking at negative space, but as a sculptor, you're always looking at the negative space. It's not so much the object, and especially in exhibition making, which like objects push you around a room, that negative space is really important. But again, all of this happened in the winter, because in Greece, it's way too hot to do this kind of, you know, if I'd started to do that in the summer here, it would dry immediately.
They dry out.
And that's another thing, because I think, like, again, with the work that I'm making, somehow the climate is important for me when I make works, how I prepare things at certain times. And
it's informed by the locality.
It's informed by the locality, and it's also, the climate is really important. But also this interaction between the pots, it's very much like we're almost fighting. Like, and I think about the clay like pushing in, and I don't know, like each pot having its own center, because eventually they have to balance. They're going to be filled with water, and if I do it narrow at the bottom, it's about finding that point of balance so that they hold themselves, but they don't.
They have to be independent.
They don't crack open and they don't fall over. So there's some kind of.
It's a fine line.
There's a fine line.
First of all, when you initially saw the space, you spoke about treating this lower ceiling area as a cave, envisioning it as a cave, and I know this has been also present in other shows. Like you have treated other exhibition spaces with part of it as a cave. Is the interest in the cave? Now you're talking about something sacred. Is the idea of the cave a symbol? The cave as a symbol, in a sense, the cave as a protected space, the cave as a womb the cave as a symbolism for femininity, or it is just a practical way of dealing with an exhibition, because I know you're very conscious of when you're preparing an exhibition, and we're talking about a solo show like this case, you're very conscious of the way people are going to move in space and how they're going to experience the work, choreographing in a way, choreographing the show. Is the cave a way of experiencing or exploring the work, like not revealing it immediately, but kind of discovering within the exhibition?
I mean, there's something kind of sacred about a cave. I think maybe you're right about the situation of the womb,
maybe
because
that's why it's sacred.
Maybe that's why it's sacred, and also because when we, when there was the cult of like the femininity, this Venus goddess, it was, now we call it the Venus goddess, which has come from, like a kind of Western perception onto ancient history from the Age of Enlightenment, and go into those details and somewhat problematic in itself. But that point where there was the cult of the female goddess, the cave, that was when people were really living in caves, and so probably there is that correlation between like us feeling safe, like in a womb-like space.
Yeah.
I don't know if probably I did think about it. I mean, one of the things that's like been the biggest influence in terms of these, I call them bead curtains, but they're actually hanging mosaics now. They started off being coming from these bead curtains that hang in houses to keep insects out and both allow the doors to be open and closed. But as
they've matured now.
Yeah, no, I mean they really are. Like the more I see it as like a platform, and from then I can make these imageries from it. But also there's that film by Werner Herzog, The Cave of Forgotten Dreams, which has been this huge influence, because like when I saw this film, it's basically he films this cave in Lascaux where they have all these cave paintings, and there's like, for example, lions and rhinoceroses, and they didn't understand why they had like numerous horns and numerous legs, but the walls of the cave are undulated, so these paintings are painted across those undulating rocks. And then when they stuck the equivalent of a candlelight in the cave, suddenly all the animals came alive. And so this is this like primitive way, let's say primitive, but it was a way of a technology of creating moving image. And that was in a very sacred space. So I think that film like threw everything, the idea that we have of progress, the idea that I think that is also, like that goes into the environmental politics that we have now, because it's really heightened. It's always been heightened, but I think at this particular moment it's really heightened. But the fact that we never progress as humans, so there always is something, and I think that's what art is for me. It's like finding something that communicates with people, but not just on a surface level. It communicates something within a core. Perhaps that's why fish are important. Like, I really liked that Apostolos' show opened at the same time as this show, and because we had this conversation when I was actually making this fish, and I was trying to contextualize why I was making fish, and he said, but it's all about hope. It's about throwing something in and hoping to catch something back, and that's what the fish symbolizes. Whether now it's taken into like a Christian ideology, it goes way further back than that. And
Apostolos is a fisherman also.
Yeah,
Apostolos,
me too.
you that is current. You fish?
I've always fished.
I didn't know that. We have referred to the fish, or maybe not the fish specifically, maybe the sea, the liquid, its connection to femininity, or the female, or the mother, actually. The sea, the creatures in the sea, the mythical negative creatures in the sea, let's say the scary ones. I think you spoke about also about these references, and I think more where you would be what I understand through the work is that you're more interested in dismantling. Is the word we can say dismantling is the right word. Kind of removing the strict definitions or strict labels, moving away from binary definitions in a way, and in that way I would say that you are, should I say that this is a very feminine show? Feminine in the sense that the female or the symbols for femininity are present, but not actually in a way that this is this is not coming out correctly. Oops.
I know. I think that because Zaragană more, it definitely has this female aspect.
I see the pots also in a way that are voluptuous. To me, they're more feminine. But we have spoken before about the idea of moving out, of breaking down these barriers of definitions between masculine and feminine, old and new. The fine art and craft.
Yeah.
What can be the private space and the public space.
Like there were definitely, I mean, some of the pots, like for me, they are more feminine, or some of them are more masculine than others. But then when I'm talking to other people, sometimes they see the masculine ones as being feminine and the feminine ones as masculine.
That's a dude for sure. The green one to me.
See, I think that's a female, and I think this is a this is a male.
Guy.
So it's just totally.
This is for sure a girl.
Yeah, but it has a heaviness. I don't know.
Interesting. So it's the lies in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, I think so. Whereas, like for me, I don't know if I should like say what I feel is more masculine, but talking about like this, talk about the linguistics of it. Like I used these fish, spathers, which are called ribbon fish in English, but in Greek a spath is a sword, and that's a feminine word in Greek, but in English, when we talk about the word sword, it has a very masculine connotation. So,
direct.
How we start deciding what is masculine and what is feminine, even if, like in the English language, there's no real like masculine or there's no masculine or feminine. But people, if you say a sword, there's a masculine connotation towards
even in the Greek, although it's a female word, the association, because it is a phallic association, holds in Greek also. Maybe more if you say spathi. So the spatha, which is the female version of spathi, it's maybe smoothing the corners a bit, making it a bit softer.
Whereas and a ribbon fish, the ribbon has an association with femininity.
Definitely.
So, and let's say like even the Zaragană or the needlefish has an association with the needle, which also comes back to works that I do a lot. I make a lot of weavings, which I haven't shown in this exhibition because I wanted to make a point as a departure. But this is my reference
it's again a weaving process in a way, like because you're threading the beads, and again the way that through the weavings are also an image that is based in this build-up process of arrangement. Yeah. In a way, you're building up the material that is very dependent. All of the material is dependent to the sequence.
The grid.
The grid, yeah.
Yeah.
And just a small note on what you were saying about the cave. What we've seen with the curtain here, particularly with the lighting, is although there is no narrative movement per se, there is no change, there is a flickering effect with lighting, and there is this slight movement, even like when sitting, there's a slight movement of the thread, which creates, there is a sense of movement.
Yeah, it's not a static work, and that was like, I think, also this Cave of Forgotten Dreams, like how can you make something technical without using technology? Like, like those guys 40,000 years ago did it. And how do you then start making it? I think also, like when I was at art school, I was like really in this like post-internet, like digital age, and I just wasn't part of that discourse. Yeah, I got a lot of it from the weavings that I make because of the nature, like again, like you say, the nature of the grid. We weave on these like fridge grills, so the nature of the fridge grill dictates the image somewhat, and it becomes sort of glitchy, and so that was projected onto it. And in a way, I think about each of these little beads as being a pixel, which you could, that's the way we see things now, maybe as well, because we live in this digital era. So we project onto technological but non-digital technologies as being digital.
We see it everywhere.
Our vision something's changed in the way
we perceive the world in a way that is, we're so familiar with the digital world right now that is actually affecting the way we're perceiving the analog world.
And that's like super fascinating, you know, you don't think of like a Afghani iCat fabric as being digital because it's been around since way before the glitch was invented, but it's glitchy, and I guess the loom was also the progression to the computer. But yeah, it's like it's like a hologram. I mean, even when you stand like looking at it from far away, it glimmers and glitches in itself. It moves, and the shadow is really important. The lighting is really important, and that obviously came. You know, that became relevant when I started hanging the bead curtains. The first bead curtain, I didn't realize how strong the shadow would be.
Yeah.
So I wasn't actually lit like that the first time I started showing them. Then I started, as I moved them off the wall, you just find all these things as you start playing, as you install stuff.
The pots, the breathing pots. How did we end up having water dripping down the breathing pots?
So the like initial idea for the breathing pots, this thing of like sculpting the air inside came as I was making them. But I started off with this idea of I wanted to make these sculptures that would start drawing themselves. So it came from looking at a plant pot that I had on my kitchen table actually, and I was filling it with water, and it was creating these lines of like residue or mold or whatever, minerals like coming through the ceramic and drawing itself onto the side. And I thought that was really beautiful because then it's again that thing of like I'm doing something, but then the material, the sculpture is like doing something back itself. It's in a way I'm just like letting something go, and then it's painting itself, it's making itself.
That's why
I
started to call them αυτοζωγραφιζόμενα, like they're self-painting.
They're just like standing here painting themselves. So like some of them have these minerals coming through, others just have this crazy mold that happened, and I think that's again to do with the climate. Like we're doing it over the summer.
And also with the fact that I hadn't realized, but the three first ones that are actually, the sun can reach them are the ones that are turning green.
Yeah.
While the other ones have turned like different yellows, more moldy.
Yellow.
There's a red, some of them have these pink.
And then this fine white, I think that's minerals coming through.
Yes, I fear they won't want to leave now.
Yeah, they might leave
it's part of the permanent installation.
But no, they were intended to have water in them, like alongside that. But and I worked with this ceramicist to get the ceramic. First of all, it's very thin because it's hammered with a wooden spoon and my hand. But to fire the ceramic so that it's made this transition into ceramic, but the pores of the ceramic are still open. So it allows for the liquid to pass through.
It's porous.
It's porous. It's a porous skin, like exoskeleton. And then the water dripping refills them as they lose water.
So we wanted, in a way, a system that will be refilling them constantly, but also in a way that is not intrusive. Visually is not intrusive, or it doesn't need to be manual. It's not a manual labor that needs to be disruptive.
Yeah.
And then we have a system that is slowly dripping water back into them, and that is creating also this effect. There is also the sound element.
There's also the sound. It's unexpected, I think, when you walk in and there's these drips because it's so subtle that people kind of wonder where it's dripping from.
Happening.
I guess in my own personal, it was a reference to the fact that my roof was leaking, your roof was
and
leaking.
My roof.
I don't know, started or like just after we'd started discussion about the show. But it also adds to this feeling of creating a cave-like environment. And then that, I use water a lot in as a material or an element in the work that I make. It's like, I think it has a femininity to it, water, but it's also cyclical. And in fish aside, I make fountains and various water as an element becomes important, and so I suppose this could be. Then there's palestra in the back, which means a kind of Roman like gymnasium, but it became like a painting, and I again using these these bronze bathers and creating something harder. You know, the water dripping, and then it brings you back into the back space where there's also the shadow of the bead curtain falling, and then there's a reflection. More and more I think about this piece palestra as being like a drawing. And then also like the reflection of it on the ceiling is again working with the shadows, drawing with the shadows, and mirroring again the painting behind, which is, I guess, the reference that everything comes from, which is like I start with drawing all the time.
It's the beginning.
Yeah.
So the palestra is like a drawing in a sense that the image is organized as a drawing. You speak of the tiles as a sculpture, and we speak of the curtain as a hanging mosaic.
Yeah.
So I think very often I'm interested into exploring the definitions of things that seem to be quite original.
There is image making of the image, but I see it as coming from a much more sculptural place. It's green glazed clay, so that means that it's fired once. So I painted the image onto, I had all the tiles made. I worked with a ceramics workshop in the north of Greece in Ceres, and they produced all the tiles for me, and I went up there and they had covered them all. So I was painting, I needed them to be wet, and so I was painting on the wet tiles. So that becomes a more sculptural process. There's also, I had to walk on the tiles, so there's like parts where you can see where I've walked on it, or like at certain points I drew lines into it, so it becomes more sculptural, even though it is a drawing. But then the other thing is that when you're working with these oxides, like, it's not paint, it's raw stone mineral.
Yes.
I don't buy glaze from a
solid.
shop. It's rock powder, basically, that I'm using, and then I'm mixing to create, like, with different flint or powders, other kinds of stone, and I mix them together. And I don't really know I don't know what's going to happen.
Yes.
It's impossible. I mean, even last year I was working with the Sèvres porcelain manufacturer for a project in Paris, and I was given access to all their glazes, and this is one of the most, I'd say, advanced ceramics glazing studios in the world. And even they couldn't tell me, these experts in glazes couldn't tell me what this glaze would become. Like, what if I put this on this? Or how many coats, what color? It could be anything from like blue to green to, one glaze can be anything from blue to green to black, depending on where it's fired. So in that sense, it is image-based, but I still feel like it's sculptural as well.
It's exciting to you. Is that exciting to you?
Yeah.
The element of...
Yeah, it's also really difficult because you just have to go for it. You can't think too much, and you're just constantly thinking, what happens if I do this? Will it be this color? Because that's like your training is to try and control stuff, but actually the less you control it, the more interesting it becomes. Finally, by the end, I was pouring these glazes on and in liquid form with like lumps in them, and it's created like the kind of really metallic look of the eyes. Animals see colors differently, so what are we really talking about when are we talking like anthropocentric by speaking about colors, or should we be making things that are like able to be experienced by many different species? When I was like looking at your questions, I kind of struggled because all my work up to now has been very much about like community and people coming together, and now I just feel like it's naive. I don't know, I feel like
Do you think it's naive to speak about community because of what we're experiencing because of COVID? Our perception of community is changing radically right now, or is undergoing a
I think that COVID has definitely had like it's a result of mass capitalism or industry, which I guess being an artist I'm also somehow part of. Everyone is part of it. It's not unless you go and live on a mountain, but there are no mountains left that you can be away from it anymore. That's it. It's like this crushing
thing. They have windmills.
Now they have windmills, and if you throw like, we also try and not throw plastic packets and not try and like order coffees in plastic cups, and then huge governments come and put windmills and say they're green, and they're actually like chopping up half of Africa in huge 2-mile craters in Chile. It doesn't seem very green, or like buying green cars or trying to make an effort. And I at the same time thinking about all of that, because I've become really into it after I tried to start building this summer my house for animals and people to live together. It was more like looking at this vernacular architecture and and creating elements. Also, I have to say that like so many objects that I make are, because of their domesticity, they're somehow connected to this metaphorical idea of the house for animals and people to live together. Like what can we...
Art and life.
Yeah, like
Being
how do we
one.
live with things, and it's...
I think very much, and we still have not mentioned aspects of your work that is, in the example of the rolling of the beads, which was bringing together to participate in making this work, or even the ceramic work, there was a collaboration with ceramicists, and the fountain, the fountain being a symbol in communities, like in hotter cities, hotter villages, that people would gather around the fountain, being a place that acts as a meeting point. And now I'm kind of bringing in a couple of diverse issues altogether in, and also particularly in the case of the weaving works that we spoke about, that they are weavings made of found fridge racks, old fridge racks, and this idea of scavenging material and reusing it, like giving it a different.
I mean, also the thing of the refrigerator being such a thing that, like, divided societies, it's a very recent modification to our lives. Before that, in warm countries, you would, I mean, I grew up in Greece, my family's South African, so I have this connection. Even then, I also grew up in the UK, which it's really cold, but there's this thing of food preservation. And so how did you preserve food? Like, the refrigerator overnight meant that rather than, like, maybe before you would kill an animal, have to find ways of preserving it and dealing with that as a community, because one person to smoke and cook and eat everything all at once is not possible. So I had this communal aspect. Now, then afterwards with the refrigerator, it meant that people could maybe kill an animal and keep all the meat for themselves. So these perhaps social structures that happen around peoples of warm countries, communities within warm countries, will overnight be changed. And so that was like another added layer to this refrigerator story. But also the first ones were called mazevi, which is to gather or collect. And so it was really thinking about people gathering or collecting themselves. And as well as, you know, the idea of weaving, that is that one line can't exist without the other. And they all need to exist together to create a whole. And that's also why they became these kind of, not community artworks, but they are artworks which reference
conscious of community in a way, but they're not
collectiveness or care.
That there is aspects in the process that you make work, in your choice of material, in the choice of processes, that in a way is suggesting a way of life, or is suggesting an outlook in life and community and existence as an artist, but as a human. So in that sense, I would link it to the project that you want to do in Kythera, that is people and animals living together, and would be a center also for strays. If I'm no,
I mean probably because I collect. No, I don't.
No, but you will have animals in the sense you're not going to be buying dogs.
No. But. It's more just thinking about a symbiosis of how we can live symbiotically, not, I guess, like going against this anthropocentric situation that we are so much in at the moment. It's how we can, what we can take most from the world, how we can develop the most without, there is no care for the environment, let's face it. It's all a farce. Like we may care, like, you care and I care. On a personal, like collective level, yes, we care. We don't want to go to the beach and see plastic in the sea, but it's so easy to drop your plastic straw cover, and it's so easy to, I don't know, lose your now face mask, and the wind catches it and it's gone.
And it's gone.
And then you see plastic in the sea, and you're like, oh shit. But not only that, it's that we all want to have lights that switch on. And we all fly places. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing that, but it's not to be. I don't know. It's just to be suggesting like that we can maybe. When I started making all this work, which is I always made artworks. I mean, I grew up on Kythera. My parents are both artists. I was home taught until I was 11 or something.
Can you give me a little bit of a background there? So they started coming to Kythera, or you were You were born in London?
I was born in London. My dad's from Zimbabwe, my mum's from South Africa.
Okay. Oh, I thought they were both South Africa.
So my dad's family moved to Cape Town when he was a teenager, and then it was obviously apartheid. And they were very much against apartheid. So if you were against apartheid, you
had to get out.
You get out, or you go to jail. There's two options, or you decide you're not against apartheid, but that wasn't
a choice.
That wasn't an option. So they left, and my uncle left first actually, and went to Kithira, and then my dad joined him.
So the first stop was Kithira, was not England?
Yeah, he just took a boat to Europe and met someone on the boat going to Kithira. It was, and he ended up there, and then my dad followed him. So it wasn't like and there were no foreigners there. I think it was very difficult for them at that point, actually. My dad came to Greece in '73. And so I grew up then, because they're both artists, they could live throughout the 80s and 90s working on this island with no internet, my dad he illustrates children's books and would draw a whole book and put it in the post and hope that it arrives in England. It's completely crazy when you think about the amount of, now it becomes, now it's seen as so radical that we can work in other places, but actually, and with the internet, but actually it's kind of possible, maybe more difficult then. Also, it was different, but there's always been this connection to the land. Plus, at that point, growing up there, we didn't really have electricity that worked very well. We didn't have a lot of stuff. You couldn't buy a lot of stuff.
Yes.
On
you
islands.
Didn't have electricity?
We had it, but it wasn't. Let's say it's
it was
not
coming and going.
It's coming and going. It still happens on the islands.
Yes. Okay, so you're mostly in Kithira. So you practically grew up in Kithira.
Yeah, and then we were going just to London for my parents to hand in some artworks, and then finally, when I was, my brother was born, we went to Oxford.
And moved
for my
there.
dad's work, and they wanted, school and stuff. But yeah, that's also a very strange situation to grow up between Kithira and Oxford, especially. Now Kithira, you can buy oat milk and you can get everything that you want there. And then you couldn't really get stuff.
But I think that gives you a very intimate understanding of very different social environments, different communities. You experienced Kithira. You knew Kithira and you knew that community, but with the international parents and also later on moving out, you also have an intimate understanding of England. Yeah. And that I think which is something that comes up in your work, in a sense that this toying with the boundaries between the private and the public, what is private, what is public, or being really kind of fluid in terms of definitions that might come from your tricultural, let's say, background.
Yeah, because you're kind of part of so many things, but never really part of never really I've never really been British, and I've never been Greek, and I've never been South African. It's a very complicated situation.
Yes, exactly. Everywhere and nowhere.
Yeah, but I think that's also why there's so many of these. Maybe that's where the community thing comes from. Actually, just trying to create
a space for yourself,
trying to create bonds, or trying to create conversation or discussion. And I think it's really important, this thing of discussion, the bead rolling ceremonies where I invite people to roll beads. It's so that I basically invite people as a performance project and I call it the Perla Perma Kral Emporium. And I invite people I make these robes and I serve teas. So it's very much about this dressing people, which is
facing their identity.
Yeah, replacing, and kind of it's an intimate gesture of putting clothes on a stranger and getting them to put clothes on each other, and then serving teas, which is again this thing of hospitality, of drinking and sharing food between each other, and then rolling these beads, which is, the beads that are produced in these performances are quite weird, and they're different to the beads that I make. For this, I work with the assistants and we roll the beads, but the beads that are made from these performances, it's not about the bead, it's about the process of sitting together, and it's solving the small problem of rolling a bead and sticking a hole through it. It's actually quite complicated. People they become really the defenses go down, and they start talking to each other, and maybe rather than judging each other face off, they're judging each other on problem solving. So It's about drawing people together.
What brought you back to Greece? When did you come back to Greece?
I moved back here when I was 18 and I started studying here. First from one place, and then I kind of just was going to Kalon Technon and doing painting there through like a little, someone was letting me in and no one said anything. I was just, and then
Because you wanted to live in Athens? You had never lived in Athens?
I'd never lived in Athens, no, but we were coming, my parents, my dad lived here in the 70s, so he still has lots of friends here and we were always spending time here, but yeah, I wanted to study here. Anyway, my parents wanted me to study in England, so I did that, and then various reasons, then applied for the Royal College, I got in, I did it, and then I finished that in 2012 and wanted to move back here, but I mean, that was really in the middle of the crisis, and I kind of listened to everyone else. Maybe it was nice. I got a residency in Paris for a year, and then while I was there, I just said, you know, this is not really what I want to do. My feeling is not in this place. It just seemed like one London from another, and London was quite like I said, it was, you know, everyone was very into this post-internet stuff, which I just, maybe because of this weird background I had, I wasn't connected so much with it. I mean, I have nothing against it, but it just wasn't really my feeling. And on top of it, I was spending so much time here anyway, and making works here, and then let's say like producing them in London. So it just made sense that I was here. So that was like 2013, 7 years ago.
2013, 7 years. So 7 years you've been here mostly. Traveling, of course, naturally, and doing residencies, but
based here.
Based here. And when, at what point, so initially you were painting? It started with painting?
Yeah, at Kalon Technon I was painting. And then I got into the sculpture course for like undergraduate by
chance?
By chance, yeah. I was kind of resistant to go back to England, and there was a space left on sculpture, and I was like, okay, why not? I'll take it. At some point I tried to change, and I was like, I think still painting my fish, and they said, no, we don't do that kind of work here. And I was like, oh. I really like. So actually, this show, it's again why this show is so important for me, because I finally managed after I don't know how many years to be like, I'm strong enough, I can just do fish. But I think there is something. Like on the surface, doing an exhibition about fish, it might seem a bit simple, but it's so relevant. It goes so much further into our kind of subconscious. It's dealing with symbolism. It's dealing with something that we all know. I'm not interested in making something that's clever or that. In the bead curtain, I don't know. I've never seen a work exist like this, like many mosaics, but not hanging ones. But I'm not interested in being radical or trying to like show. I'm interested in like tapping into that core that I think everyone has, and that there's somehow a spirituality in that.
I mean, my favorite subject, it comes up a lot. There is in a sense that you want to connect instinctively in a way or you're tapping into the center of we can all connect around certain things.
Well, I think that's what art is like. It's about communication and like non-verbal communication.
Rather
for me,
than
that's
disruption.
Rather than disruption, yeah. But like a moment of, somehow I think the artist is like a mirror, like your job as an artist is to absorb and then project. I think a lot about all these things as because they're made by crafted. It's like these sculptures that I'm making are like a remnant of performance, so they can continue to perform. I do actually want to make similar ones, but they'll be different, more like thinking about this thing of the air conditioning units or like water cooling systems that your mum was speaking about.
Yeah.
But those will be new ones, but these ones I think that they should continue their life as they are, and however they change, like maybe they'll move to a different location and develop further. Whether that's possible, it's a bit more complicated in terms of packaging and things. I don't know. It would be amazing if they could just continue to keep living and keep growing. It's very complicated to make like a work like these tiles. Involves a lot of people. It's a very collective project effort. Each tile needs to be handmade. There's a certain science involved in the shrinkage, and that's sculpture. And this is the starting point of these fish. I've also been making a new beaded curtain of eels, which is another project that I'm working on. When I think about the Zaraganna, she's like quite light and quite sexy and a little bit quick. And an eel is like, let's say that if the Zaraganna is above, the eel is below. It comes from the mud.
Darkness.
It has this darkness to it. It's an air of mystery. So that's the, like, I'm not working like thematically like that, but let's say it's like start off with these
things
feelings
that have spurred from the last things.
Or like things that like really particularly draw my interest. Like I started off with the Zaraganna, then I was finding these eels and finding their shapes so beautiful to where they flop onto each other and the slime that they have on them. It's really interesting. And then also that it's like always using these things that have like everything is somehow anthropological because we've taken over everything. Or we have a use for everything. So what is the eel? Is the eel Medusa? I don't know. But basically every eel that goes and breeds in the Sargasso Sea, like every eel around the world breeds in the Sargasso Sea, which is like a sea with no land around it. It's like a combination of all these.
Wow, they travel.
Yeah. And they can like...
The eel is the traveler, the explorer.
And they live underground. And there's like a lot of interesting stuff. Freud spent 8 years in Trieste dissecting eels to find their genitals, and they don't have any. They like develop them at a certain point when they get to the Sargasso Sea. So they're again like androgynous creatures.
And the perseverance to mate.
Yeah, and like Aristotle had all these ideas. Like everyone's had these weird ideas about eels, and like there was a Roman emperor who would like throw his slaves as punishment into a pool of eels that would eat them. Like horrible. There's a lot of history around the eel.